Welcome back to our lecture on single subject research, Chapter 10. In this lecture, I'll be talking about design. When you have one subject or a very small number of subjects, one of the ways that we represent our type of design is through a standardized notation system. Whenever we're looking at the standardized notation, we always denote things with either the letter A or B. The letter A is always going to refer to baseline measurements when we have a single subject's design. Now, keep in mind, baseline is just a fancy word for saying the time where we are not doing any active or experimental treatments. It's a time where we're just observing what is occurring. The other notation that we tend to use is the letter B, and the B is referring to the outcome or the treatment period in which we are observing how people respond to our manipulations. So the simplest type of design that we have here is the A-B design. An A-B design is a process where we have a baseline measurement, and then we apply some treatment, and we measure during both the baseline and the treatment phases. Ultimately, what we're doing here is we're seeing how do people behave when undergoing treatments as opposed to how people behaved when there was no treatment in place. If we see some sort of difference, we determine whether we think a change has occurred or not. The A-B design is very simple, but it acts much in the same way as our basic control group, experimental group design does in studies that have more people. Essentially, when we look at the participants' A measurements, they are acting like the control condition, whereas the B measurements are acting like the experimental group. And so the A-B design has some amount of internal validity, but it's not high in internal validity. There are lots of threats to internal validity that can cause a change to people's behaviors during the B phase that are unrelated to the actual experimental treatment. Think of history or think of maturation, regression to the mean. All of those could be extraneous variables. So if you want to improve the type of design that you use in your single subject research, you may consider the ABA design. In an ABA design, we have a baseline, a treatment, and then another baseline phase. So what makes this different than that basic AB design is that we have this additional return to baseline condition. If we observe some sort of change during phase B, this is due to our experimental treatment. And when we remove the experimental treatment from this, we should return to a baseline condition, and that change should completely disappear. So by having a control, a treatment, and then control again, what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to see some change only during that B phase. If on one hand, a change in B is due to some other extraneous variable, the change will not disappear when we remove B and we go back to baseline. Thus, the ABA design allows us to have more confidence in drawing causal relationships than the basic AB design does. Now, keep in mind, there's a little bit of an ethical dilemma here in that in the ABA design, what we're doing is we're leaving the participant back at baseline. And if this is a behavioral intervention, this is not going to be desirable for you. By leaving the person in a baseline condition, you're leaving them kind of hanging without treatment. This is what an example of an ABA design could look like. Here we see a baseline measurement of how many social interactions a little 7-year-old boy was engaging in prior to receiving some sort of experimental treatment. In treatments 2 through 6 here, though, what you're seeing is he was getting some sort of cues to prompt interaction, and therefore his social interactions increased significantly from where they were before. Now, this is an ABA design, so as you know, we're going to remove those cues to interact. And what we see is that the behavior, once again, decreases when we're in a baseline phase. So hopefully you're seeing what I mean by we're kind of leaving the client hanging without any sort of experimental treatment. if you were the parent of this 7-year-old boy and you saw his social interactions increase during this experimental phase, but then you saw them regress back when the treatments are removed, you would be quite upset. So the ABA design allows researchers to have a little bit more confidence and a little bit more internal validity, but it's not always an ideal treatment, and it doesn't have necessarily the practical significance that we would hope it would. Therefore, the more commonly used design is the ABA-B design. ABA-B design is, of course, a baseline, a treatment, a baseline, and a treatment again. This type of design is essentially a final treatment phase to the more basic ABA design. And this one allows our client to be left on the experimental cycle. We also have some additional data that we're getting here. We have two transitions from treatment to baseline and baseline to treatment. And this is really allowing us to further have a sense of the effect of our treatment variable. Of all the types of designs for the single subjects design, this one allows us to best determine cause and effect relationships and has the most internal validity. Here is an example of an ABA-B design. Here we're looking at talking out behaviors of a child who has mental retardation. So number of talking out behaviors of, it looks like Johnny here, during the baseline phase looks like about 3 or 5 approximately per day. But when we have a treatment here, it looks like contingent attention, we see the number of talking out behaviors significantly decrease. Then we remove the treatment, and we see the number of talking out behaviors once again increase. We put the treatment back into place, and look, once again, number of talking out behaviors decreases again. Hopefully you can see that we are much more confident in this type of design, that our treatment is actually causing a change in behavior. And I hope you also see that we're being a little bit more ethical in the sense that we're leaving this child with mental retardation with the treatment in place so that he's engaging in less talking out behaviors. When you look at our single subject designs, I think you should see really by now that the ABA-B design is really the preferred design for single subjects research. But keep in mind, if you're a clinician using this type of treatment plan, there may be times that you actually would prefer to use that more basic AB design. One of the reasons is that it may be either impractical, unethical, or impossible to reverse a treatment during a therapy session. So for example, if we are looking at headbanging behaviors in a child and we're trying to reduce this because the child is causing harm to themselves, it would be impossible to go to the parents of this child who's engaging in the headbanging behavior and say, you know, as this child's therapist, I would like to institute a treatment in order to decrease your child's headbanging behaviors, but then I'd like to remove that treatment, and we're going to see if his headbanging behaviors increase. You're not going to go to any parent and say that, right? So that would be, undesirable, certainly, maybe possibly unethical to engage in such a practice. By now, I hope you understand the way we use the notation designs within single subjects designs, either notating something with an A or B, depending if it's baseline or treatment. I hope you also see that the ABA-B design has the most internal validity, but that there are certainly reasons to use the AB design as well. Thank you for your attention.